Welcome to the first ever episode of the Being Comfortably Uncomfortable podcast with child psychologist Andrew Greenfield. In this episode, Andrew takes a look at the important subject of behaviour management. It's one parents don't want to miss. I'm your host, Anthony Pearl. Well, hello everyone, and I think we've really got to start this first episode with a very important introduction to the main star of the show. Andrew, do you want to introduce yourself and give people a little bit of a sense of your background and your story?
Sure. So, Andrew Greenfield, I'm a child and educational psychologist. Been working in the field for, I guess, over 25 years, I think it is. And work with lots of schools, work with parents directly, work with teachers, work with other allied health professionals. So I guess it's a pediatrician, psychiatrist, it's a range of different people that I work with, and on a range of different topics, whether it's an assessment or it could be an assessment for a number of different reasons. It could be counselling for, again, a whole range of different reasons. So it is quite varied as to what I will often speak about, which makes it interesting for me.
Yeah, and you've got a wealth of experience over a long period of time, and I think including a lot of appearances in the media. But I think one of the restrictions that we have in the media, of course, is that you only get a limited space to talk about things. So I think the purpose of this podcast is really so we can expand on a lot of those topics.
That's right, exactly. I want to be able to give people, I'm not going to be able to solve all the problems, nor do I want to solve everyone's problems in a relatively short space of time. But it's about education, it's about discussing, it's about coming up with some ideas that I guess affect everyone. I've got 3 kids of all different ages, so I do practice what I preach to some degree as well. So it's the type of thing that I talk every single day to parents about, I talk to the kids about, and even speak to the schools about. So yeah, I'm excited to be able to share that knowledge with as many people as I can.
And I think that's an important thing here as well for people to know that there's a degree of interactivity with the podcast as well, because if you do have topics of interest that you want us to have a look at in future episodes, we'll include some notes alongside of the podcast for you to be able to interact and send us those questions, and we'll have a look at them in future episodes. I guess I wanted to start with, before we get into the topic of today, is to talk about the name for the podcast, because you and I had some interesting discussions back and forthing about the name, but this whole idea of being uncomfortably comfortable, tell me a little bit about the history of that terminology.
Yeah, so I mean, when I'm counselling with any child and or the parents, I'm always talking about, I guess, issues that affect them in their day-to-day lives, and we often talk about different emotions and emotional regulation and emotional dysregulation. So often we're talking about when you are, whether it's angry or frustrated or annoyed or embarrassed or any of these emotions at all, sad, depressed, we often feel uncomfortable. And that's the feedback that I get from the people that I see. They're uncomfortable in some way. And that's to be expected. That what I try and speak to everybody about is to try and help them be a little bit more comfortable being uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Because for a whole lot of different reasons, we don't really have a choice with a lot of the uncomfortability. This is real life, and it affects us adults as well. And we need to be able to deal with that. And some people will deal with it better than others, as adults and as kids. So it came from there. And it's something, I guess, that I not only talk about every day, but I kind of think about every day. And it's amazing just the trigger sometimes with kids where they realize, and adults, it's okay to be a bit uncomfortable some of the time. And it doesn't have to be an unhealthy way of thinking. Generally, it doesn't mean that we strive to be uncomfortable as much as we can, but it's about not always try not to struggle with being uncomfortable. And I think that's one of the biggest keys that I find that really resonates with the whole population that I see as well. So it's not necessarily it's not going to cover every single topic that I talk about, but I just think that was what came to me straight away. Being comfortably uncomfortable and living with that and being uncomfortable some of the time is generally okay to do.
And I think there's two levels to that, just to touch on is one, I mean, being uncomfortable is also about growth, isn't it? I mean, we all experience that some level of growth by being uncomfortable in certain situations.
Yeah, no, that's right. And when your first step obviously is recognizing what you are, that you're uncomfortable. And we talk to kids about what you can see within yourself, whether it's physical symptoms or it's what your actual language. There's a whole range of things that I take kids through. And this is of all different ages. And obviously I'm going to tailor the language towards the child's age and even towards their cognitive ability. So there are so many factors. It's all got to be tailored towards that individual person. Um, but the general concept is the same. And it's about not only figure out, well, yes, we might be uncomfortable. We often obviously talk about ways of how do you get comfortable? How do you get more comfortable? So it's not, it's a combination of, talking about growth and how we can change from that initial position. But that growth isn't going to come from 1 second to the next, or from one day to the next, or maybe not even 1 month to the next. It's a process that does take time. And this is something that once we start talking about that, a lot of the people that I see, especially the teenagers, realize, oh, well, I'm actually not that different to anybody else. It's okay that I feel this way. I don't have to feel guilty for feeling this way. And some of the time, it's okay to be like that. I don't have to strive to be the most confident, happy person 100% of the time. And just by knowing that, I think is a huge relief for the population that I see.
Absolutely. And I imagine that though the second level to that is really dealing with parents, as you do as well, because it's one thing for you individually to be living in that uncomfortable space, but it's another thing for helping parents recognize that their child is in that space and how they work with them to help them.
Yeah, and that's often when I am working with it, and I work with kids from all ages up to sort of, I guess, 5 up to obviously 18, and then I do work with adults for a whole range of different other reasons. But often when I'm working with them, I often do start with, even from the 5 to 18-year-olds. I work with the parents and the child in the room first of all. Probably take a step back. I will always get the background, the history from the parents, and that most of the time will be without the children there. But the next step would be with the parents and the child, and I want to often see the dynamics between the parents and the child. They don't even have to open their mouth a lot of the time. I can see the non-verbal language, and even the unspoken word can be hugely powerful just from what I'm picking up on and what I can see. So it's and then obviously the child on their own after that. So it's a combination of all of those factors. That's how I work. Everyone else is going to work differently, but that's what I find quite valuable, is to see the dynamics, especially working in the family dynamic space as well.
Yeah, and I suppose that brings us to the big first topic that we wanted to talk about in this episode, which is really around behavior management, because it does rely on both aspects, doesn't it? The parent and the child. So talk to me about some of the biggest challenges that parents face firstly when they're with their kids, whether they're young or into their teens.
Yeah, and I might even take a step back even before that, because often I did talk to parents about the different parenting styles, and there were always different parentings. I kind of start with the 3 main ones that I look at. One is authoritative, which is, I guess, firm but fair. There's permissive, which I guess can be considered wimpy and weak in terms of style. And then you got authoritarian, which is more like a controlling bully. I often do see not necessarily has to be one or the other, and sometimes it's a bit of one or two of those styles. But the first step is, I guess, for the parents recognizing which style they generally are, and you might have 2 different parents or caregivers that are complete opposites. And then we talk about that in itself, where there's no consistency. So that's one of the first things, is trying to figure out your parenting style. And everyone's style is going to come from a whole range of different places. Once we've figured out what type of parenting style, I'll then start to talk about, I guess, the effectiveness of their parenting. And I often talk about, well, how do you measure how effective you are as a parent? That's something that is incredibly difficult to be able to measure how effective you are. It's more about, and that effectiveness is going to be measured very differently from one family to the next, because some families value some behaviours and not others, and some people have less tolerance than others. So it's going to be huge individual differences in the parents themselves as well, and often between, again, mum and dad and caregivers.
I think you raised an important couple of points there. I mean, I can see, the whole good cop, bad cop thing is may come out in the parenting style, but I think also attuning to the parents' different values, because there isn't a one size fits all approach to how you might deal with a child that has behavioural issues. And so I think that's really an important consideration, isn't it? About understanding and not necessarily trying to completely change, is it, the way that a parent naturally tends to be.
Yeah, that's right. You're not going to change somebody's personality. That's just part of the way that they're going to parent, is part of their personality. I don't want to change that necessarily, but I think parents can learn how to be more effective with what they're doing, and I think that's the point. So an example of that may be, I mean, one of the most common scenarios is my child doesn't listen. Let's talk about that for a second. And we all have those, myself included. So I guess I'm talking probably any age, really, not necessarily just the younger ones. Plenty of us have teenagers out there that just don't listen some of the time. And I guess for a second, we're assuming it's not necessarily an auditory processing issue. It's not necessarily an attention issue. We'll get to that at some other segments. Assuming that it's more they don't want to, or there's a bit of disobedience, or there's a bit of oppositional defiance. That's what I'm talking about. So I'm ruling out any other major factor that may be the cause of their not hearing the parents. And I'll often try and make sure that I do rule all of those other factors out. So we know it's purely a listening thing, and they're just choosing not to listen. It's a choice. So that's one of the biggest scenarios. And I say to parents, well, most of the time when parents are talking to their kids, they're shouting from one room to the other while they're on doing something, maybe cooking or doing some work or dealing with another child, and then the other child's doing something on a device or watching television or doing 1,000 things. And whatever, the message just doesn't get through, as you can imagine. It's chaos, and that's our lives. We're all busy, we're all doing things. So often what I say to parents, one of the biggest things that I say is, we need to slow the world down. And that's difficult in this day and age, because life is busy. We're always busy. We're always doing something. We're always on a device. And that is life. But I often say to parents, well, and the biggest argument is, well, I haven't got time. It takes my time to be able to slow things down and to be able to encourage them to get in front of their child, get eye contact, wait till they haven't got anything in their hand, and then give them instruction. And of course, the biggest argument is, well, I haven't got time to do that because life's busy. And I would completely agree with that. But the only problem with that is that maybe half an hour later, when they haven't listened to a single thing you've said, they haven't followed through with any message that you've given them, we ended up having to still go and get in front of them, get eye contact, and get down to the level anyway. So trying to do that first, which is not necessarily a natural process or natural thing to do, especially with the younger ones, the 5 to sort of 10-year-olds, we may end up having to do that anyway.
Yes, and when you're doing that anyway, you're often doing it under greater duress, because tensions have risen as a result of the not listening in the first place. So it actually makes the problem a whole lot worse. And I guess I wanted to just ask you as well about this kind of the measurement of success that you touched on before as well, and even using that scenario you've just painted. Often we think when we're measuring success in a situation is we need that overall picture looking over an extended period of time. But I imagine that you've got to look at these individual little steps as success, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, what one parent counts as effective or successful behavior management is going to be very different to another. And again, a lot of the times, this is all going to be complicated with difficulties that the child has. And again, I deal a lot with kids with learning issues and ADHD and autism and language difficulties. So a lot of the population I see it is all complicated by all of those factors, which we will talk about at some point down the track. So it doesn't really change drastically what I would recommend with parents, even if they do have some form of developmental difficulty or disorder. The same general principles will absolutely apply. The only difference is you may have to do more of everything, be more persistent, be more consistent, be more effective, be more of everything. That's probably one of the biggest differences. And it takes more time. They're the huge differences between having I guess what we call nowadays a neurotypical child compared to a child with maybe some sort of developmental difficulties of any kind.
Thanks for your company, and please see the show notes for how to get in contact with Andrew Greenfield, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes.
And remember, it's important to learn how to be comfortably uncomfortable some of the time.